Most people think that getting ahead in their career is all about having the right connections, a perfect resume, knowing exactly what steps to take. But honestly, that's not what holds most of us back. The real obstacle, the thing that really keeps us stuck, is ourselves. I'm not talking about just working harder or being more motivated. I'm talking about something deeper. I remember reading this post online from someone who was really struggling. They said something like, "I'm not like my father, who just wakes up every morning and grinds through whatever life throws at him. I feel weak inside. Does that mean I'm doomed?" And man, that hit me hard because I've heard that same sentiment from so many people. They went to see a career counselor. They're trying to figure out their future. And they keep coming back to this feeling of inadequacy. This person kept comparing themselves to their dad, someone they saw as the ideal provider, someone who knows everything, handles everything, suffers through everything, and protects everyone. They wanted to be like that, but they just felt weak in comparison. Their father's approach to career and life seemed so strong, so full of willpower and endurance. Meanwhile, they felt like life was just tossing them around like a rag doll. Their siblings seemed to choose their paths with confidence and move forward. This person felt stuck, incompetent, like they couldn't even make basic choices. Now, they were clear that maybe this was all a projection, that their father actually loved them and wanted them to succeed. But still, that feeling of shame persisted. They thought maybe if they could just grind hard enough on their career, make something of themselves, then maybe they wouldn't feel so ashamed anymore. Maybe then they'd feel like a strong person. But deep down, they weren't sure if that would even help, because the issue wasn't really about their family. It was about feeling weak from within, all their choices, all their reactions, not even wanting to be in this world sometimes. If you've ever felt like you're not good enough because you're not one of those people who wakes up loving the grind, who's excited to work hard and do great things every single day, I want you to really hear this. We've been sold this idea that there are certain qualities, certain personality traits that make people successful in their careers. And we've got tons of scientific research backing this up. There are studies on healthcare professionals, for instance, showing that traits like work drive and conscientiousness are strongly correlated with career satisfaction. Conscientiousness means when you have a goal, you work consistently toward it. You're a hard worker. That's supposedly what it takes to be successful. But here's the problem. Many of us, and I'm including myself here, were born with low conscientiousness. So what happens if you don't have the traits that are supposedly necessary for career success? All the research says that people who work hard, people who wake up every day grinding are the ones who succeed, and you're just not like that. You're not like the person who makes all the right choices and grinds relentlessly. You feel weak inside. Does that mean you're completely screwed? Thankfully, the answer is no. And there's actually more research we can dig into here, because I've worked with tons of people who are frankly lazy like I am, and we've discovered ways for them to succeed in their careers anyway. This is especially important in the world we're living in right now, where things are genuinely hard. Jobs are being replaced by technology and automation. People are getting underpaid. We're sold on the promise of a fulfilling career and then find ourselves in dead-end jobs with seemingly no way out. Things are becoming really difficult out there. This is partly why we started our career coaching program. When we first launched it a few years back, it started off pretty slow. The slots didn't even fill up initially. But every year since then, we've been adding more and more spots because the demand has been huge and it works really well. And what we learned through this process is absolutely critical. A lot of people think career advice is about doing the right things, networking, perfecting your resume, all that external stuff. But the most important thing that will hold you back in your career is actually yourself. It's the way you deal with your internal self. What judgments are you making about yourself? What are your hang-ups? What are you trying to prove to everyone around you that's causing you to make certain choices? In my case, I decided I was going to be a doctor because doctors are respected, right? I thought I'd be the best doctor. I'd go to the most prestigious school, and then everyone would look at me and think I was impressive. I'd walk into a room, people would notice me, think about my accomplishments. But what actually happened? Promptly ended up failing a bunch of classes because everything I was doing was driven by ego, not by genuine interest or sustainable motivation. If you want to succeed in your career, you absolutely have to understand yourself. Let me explain what I mean by that. We live in a strange time right now. Success in your career used to be maybe 50% internal stuff, working on yourself, and 50% external stuff like luck, circumstances, connections. You had to work on yourself and work the system. But there's something weird happening right now. The world is actually getting worse in many ways, which means the external forces determining your career success are growing stronger and more difficult to navigate. The economy is struggling. There's inflation, automation, and artificial intelligence are disrupting entire industries. There are all kinds of problems making it harder to succeed. What I'm noticing with the people we work with is that the world is becoming a harder place to build a career in. Would you agree or disagree with that? Think about it for a moment. If the world is becoming a harder place, that means there's actually less you can do about the external circumstances. Things are just so challenging, so difficult that your control over external factors is diminishing. And here's the really crazy thing about that. The less you can do about external factors, the more important it becomes to focus on what you can control. The internal work becomes more critical, not less. Interestingly enough, I think you should actually be investing more in understanding and developing yourself, because that's truly the only thing you can control. That's the real thing you can optimize. When the world is stacked against you, you need to be operating at 100% internally. You can't afford to be anything less than fully optimized within yourself, because the external world certainly isn't working in your favor. Paradoxically, the harder the external world has become, the more important it is to fix yourself, to understand yourself on your internal issues. Now, that might sound completely insane at first, but let me show you the flip side to illustrate this point. Imagine I'm alive back in the 1960s. In that era, the path to success was relatively straightforward. You'd go to college, maybe experiment a bit with the counterculture, and then you could basically waltz into an investment bank and get a job before everything became so optimized and financially precarious. You could buy a house for maybe $60,000, $5,000, support a family of 4 in the United States on a single income with just a bachelor's degree, and everything would be totally fine. You'd get promoted because opportunities were abundant, everything was easier. When the world used to be easier like that, people didn't have to work so hard on themselves internally. They could just slide into a successful job, literally fall into good opportunities. This is why we get such questionable advice from some older generations. They tell you things like, just put yourself out there. They didn't need to do any of this emotional work, this understanding yourself, all this stuff that younger people are doing nowadays. They didn't need any of that back in their day. They had to show up, demonstrate some basic work ethic, and opportunities would come to them. Graduate from college and land themselves a good position at a company. That's just how it worked back then. You applied yourself. You showed up consistently, and people would give you opportunities and good salaries. That's all it took. But that's not the world we live in anymore. Back in their day, you didn't have to do a whole lot of self-work because the world was genuinely easier. And we have good objective indicators of this. The housing price index compared to median income, the actual value of a college degree, and how much it improves your earning power. There are so many strong economic indicators showing that this isn't just someone pandering to younger generations or trying to get attention online. This is objectively real. That's just how it worked back then. So here's the insight. The easier the world is, internal work you have to do. It's like when I'm playing the tutorial level of a video game, I don't need to have all of my skills polished and perfected because what I'm up against isn't difficult. The tutorial is designed to be easy. But now the problem is that the world we're up against is very difficult. It's genuinely stacked against us in many ways. This is why it's incredibly important that you optimize yourself, because the world certainly isn't going to come knocking on your door begging you to work for them. No one's desperately recruiting most people. You have to be exceptional or perfectly positioned to get those opportunities. And even then, things are uncertain. So the question becomes, you see you smiling. How do you actually work on yourself? What do you do practically? Here's the big problem with most advice out there. It's kind of generic. It assumes a certain type of personality. And this is why I love being alive today, because we have this amazing tool called science. If we look at scientific research, it can give us real answers about how to succeed in the workplace. I've seen this both in my coaching work with clients and in my work with patients as a psychiatrist. There's research that explores the detailed relationships between enduring personal characteristics and a resilient approach to work and career. It's similar to those studies about conscientiousness, but it digs much deeper. And when you dig deeper, you discover something genuinely interesting. In order to have a positive career experience and success, you need what they call a resilient approach to work and career. That makes sense, right? Be resilient and you'll succeed. But what does that actually mean in practice? It means there are situational influences, which are external circumstances, and how lucky you are. There are stable attributes, which are your internal characteristics. If you develop these things in the right way, combining both the internal and external, you'll become resilient. And that resilience leads to success. But let's dig even deeper. What does resilience actually consist of? The research identifies 4 key components. First, your satisfaction with your organization and your career, meaning how satisfied you feel with where you work and what you do. Second, how involved you are in your work and how much you invest in it. Third, job satisfaction combined with how you handle workplace pressure. And fourth, how well you engage in career planning. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers looked at various personality attributes like neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, critical thinking skills, conscientiousness. That earlier research I mentioned said conscientiousness is good and everything else is basically bad. This deeper research reveals something much more nuanced. The results show that one of these traits isn't simply better than all the others. All of these attributes are actually useful if you know how to use them properly. That's what the study demonstrated. If you're neurotic and not particularly conscientious, that's actually okay. You just need to play to your strengths. For instance, when looking at organization and career satisfaction, the research indicated that age was a significant predictor. Lesson number 1 here is if you're unhappy in your career and you're 22 or 24 or 30, 1 year old, as you give it more time, your satisfaction will likely improve. That's not really actionable advice, but it does mean you shouldn't lose hope just because you're struggling early in your career. Assertiveness turned out to be important. Straightforwardness mattered, meaning not messing around or being indirect. And here's something surprising. Even impulsiveness can lead to career satisfaction when channeled properly. For career and job involvement, achievement striving was a significant predictor, which makes sense. Trying to be good at what you do matters. So did openness to ideas and being open-minded. I want to pause here because this is crucial. This isn't just saying that the hardest working people succeed. This research is telling us is that certain attributes like being open-minded and even being impulsive have actually been shown to improve resilience when they're used in the right way. That's profound. Looking at job satisfaction and workplace pressure, hostility significantly predicted these things in a negative way, which isn't surprising. More hostility means less satisfaction. But here's another really interesting finding. The more imaginative you are, less likely you are to be satisfied with your job. Think about it. If you're highly imaginative, you're constantly thinking about how things could be done differently, better ways to approach problems. You're not content to just be a cog in a machine following procedures. You can envision alternatives that can make it harder to be satisfied with the status quo. For career planning, age again was a significant predictor. Achievement striving predicted it. Straightforwardness, interestingly, didn't predict it. Openness to ideas predicted it in a positive way. Pure imagination was less predictive there. So what does all this mean? I know it's getting a bit complicated. Let me try to simplify this for you. If you're struggling to find success in your career, there are a couple of key things you need to understand. There's external stuff you can do, like networking and working on your resume. What we've found through our career coaching work, which has become probably our most successful program, is that you absolutely have to work on yourself and your own internal issues first. As you get better as a human being, as you understand yourself more deeply, your career progress will improve. This is especially true in today's world. Today's world will take advantage of you if you let it. It will undervalue you. Companies will tell you they're going to give you a promotion and then not follow through. You might try to make your boss happy only to realize they're taking advantage of your hard work. It genuinely does not feel good out there for a lot of people. So you need to be internally strong and self-aware. What I've seen as a psychiatrist is that while certain traits, like being hardworking, might lead to career success in today's world, if you're a hardworking person without boundaries or self-awareness, that might just lead you to get exploited. I had a patient who worked in investment banking, and this person was genuinely a superstar. They went to a community college, some super prestigious university. They'd been in the military, worked incredibly hard, went to college afterward, finished at that community college, interviewed at a mid-tier investment bank, and absolutely knocked it out of the park. They did really well through sheer effort and competence. This person ended up moving to different investment banks, which is common in that industry, and eventually landed at a top-tier bank, one of the absolute best. They were doing billion-dollar deals with huge companies everyone has heard of. But as they started working harder and harder, they began running into serious problems. Their boss realized they were a workhorse. As long as this person was underneath them doing the heavy lifting, the boss would get a lot of rewards and recognition. One day, the boss even pulled them aside and said directly to their face, "You're going to make me a lot of money on this deal." Can you imagine someone saying that to you? Just openly acknowledging that they're using you for their own benefit. So we often hear that conscientiousness works, that being hardworking leads to success. And it does, but only up to a point. All of your personality attributes, whether you're neurotic, whether you're conscientious, whatever they may be, these can help you or hurt you depending on how you use them. You have to understand the hand you're dealt. Being dealt what seems like a bad hand isn't necessarily bad at all. It's not as simple as saying these attributes lead to success and these attributes don't. You have to know how to play your particular hand. We talked about how conscientiousness and a tendency toward hard work can actually get you into trouble. I've had plenty of patients who work incredibly hard and just get taken advantage of. They do tons of work that isn't compensated or appreciated. They take on extra responsibilities, burn themselves out, and don't get anywhere. So if you're someone who works really hard, I want you to ask yourself one critical question. What is the return on investment of my effort? What do I actually get when I work hard? How much of this is truly appreciated and rewarded? Another trait people struggle with is neuroticism. We tend to think about neuroticism, which is the tendency to see problems and worry about them, as a purely negative characteristic. People who are high in neuroticism have more anxiety, more worry, more concern about what could go wrong. Life feels harder for them. Neuroticism is actually very important for predicting and preventing problems. People who end up as doctors, for instance, tend to be high in both neuroticism and conscientiousness. When I'm afraid I'm going to fail an exam, even when I've already studied plenty, and I sit at home on a Friday night studying even more because I'm paranoid and anxious that I might fail, that's who ends up with a perfect grade point average. Instead of partying with friends, I'm staying home, studying, even though I've already studied enough? The key thing about neuroticism is you need some degree of emotional regulation to not let it take complete control of you. The healthy way to treat it is to recognize that this is your mind telling you there are particular problems you could encounter. You think about what those problems are, you make a plan to deal with them, you implement that plan, and then you're done. That's what healthy neuroticism looks like. It's considering potential problems and then implementing plans to address them. Sometimes it gets to be too much, but often what happens is we try to shut down our neurotic thoughts entirely or distract ourselves from them, which doesn't actually help. Agreeableness is another really interesting trait. This is a perfect example of something that's both good and bad depending on how you use it. People who are highly agreeable tend to go along with others. They're more likely to say things like, if you want to do it that way, that's totally fine with me. Agreeableness is one of those characteristics where if you're too agreeable, you'll absolutely get taken advantage of. But if you're not agreeable enough, people will dislike working with you and see you as difficult. It's really about understanding the ways you're naturally not agreeable and thinking about how you can express that in a positive, constructive way. Here's an example. If you don't like the way your manager does something that makes complete sense, genuinely be doing something wrong or inefficiently, you have to be careful about how you address it. Companies often reward people who want to improve things and make them better. Just because you don't want to do things your manager's way doesn't mean you should just complain about it. There's a certain skill to voicing your concerns effectively. You always want to tie things back to actual results and value. If you're advocating for change in a system, see so many posts online and hear people complaining in real life about how things at their job are terrible, and they tried to tell management and got fired for it. They say their manager is on a power trip, has ego issues, but what they're doing is genuinely terrible. And the thing is, depending on how you approach it, there's a certain finesse required. Speaking up can either get you punished or rewarded. If you see a problem at work, first of all, tie things to concrete outcomes and value. Don't blame people directly. Don't get angry about it. Go to your boss and say something like, hey, I noticed we do things a certain way. Would you be open to talking about a potential adjustment? I had a thought about it. Be respectful and deferential. Frame it as a question. What do you think about this idea? This is where we often get really worked up and want to do things a particular way. And then we go to people aggressively. That's what happens with low agreeableness. When you have low agreeableness, you have no patience for other people's mistakes or inefficiencies, and you have to learn how to moderate that a little bit. Low agreeableness is actually giving you a path toward improving things at your workplace. That's what's beautiful about it when channeled correctly. Now let's talk about openness. Openness is particularly interesting because in the research, for some factors, it improved outcomes, and for others, it might have made them worse. That's really important to understand. Openness means being open to new experiences, being willing to think about things differently, receiving new information, trying different approaches. Generally speaking, when we're more open, we tend to be happier. If you're someone with very low openness, you should really work on cognitive flexibility. Think about how your mind produces thoughts in a particular way and challenge yourself to consider, how can I think about this differently? Generally speaking, the more open and flexible we are, the more satisfied we'll be with our jobs. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean your job is objectively better or worse. People who are open are willing to consider perspectives that aren't their own. I see as a psychiatrist is when people get really stuck in their own heads with thoughts like, this is the way my work is, this is the way my job is, and it's terrible. Without any flexibility around that perspective, they just suffer as a result. People with low openness tend to suffer a lot because once they get a bad taste in their mouth or a negative thought in their head, they have tremendous difficulty getting out of it. The last trait is extroversion. This is another one where a lot of research will say that the more extroverted you are, the more successful you'll be in the workplace. That's both true and untrue. Some studies working at a very high level will say extroversion is good in the workplace, and generally speaking, that's true. But what actually matters in the workplace isn't that you're an extrovert. You form meaningful relationships. Extroverts are like social butterflies. They enjoy talking to different people, moving from conversation to conversation, building a wide network. I'm seeing a lot of this, especially with extroverted managers who are strongly advocating for return to office after remote work because they genuinely hate being on video calls. They don't get that extroverted energy they really crave from virtual interactions. But here's the key thing to understand. Relationships are critically important to advance at work, but you don't need to be an extrovert to build relationships. In fact, introverts often love deep relationships. Introverts love spending 3 hours with one person diving deep into a particular topic. It's not that you have to be an extrovert. Even the introverted relationships can be incredibly powerful for career advancement. I actually think the best networking often happens between introverts. The kind of interactions that many people who are introverted are terrified of is exactly what we can excel at. If your boss wants to play a round of golf, you should absolutely go with them if you're able. That one time, which can be intimidating at first, is where introverts actually shine. It's not that we want to be isolated from people. It's that we get sensory and social overload in certain situations. When we're at a big party or a networking mixer, we find it draining and uncomfortable. Here's something I find very helpful. When you have some mixer or social event and some extrovert is excitedly planning karaoke or some group activity, and you're thinking to yourself how much you don't want to participate, you can do something really strategic afterward. The next day, go talk to your boss and say, hey, it was nice going to the party yesterday, but we didn't really get a chance to talk very much. I was wondering if you'd want to grab coffee sometime. I'd love to catch up. Create introverted experiences for yourself. Focus on meaningful one connections. Form tight relationships with key people. You'll find that when you engage with someone individually like this, it can be incredibly effective. Now, there's also social anxiety and shyness that are technically different from introversion. So you might have to work through some of that. Introverts can absolutely excel in the workplace. I often find that the most introverted people can be incredibly effective at building the relationships that matter. Think about characters like Tyrion from popular stories. He's an introvert. He's exceptionally good at forming meaningful one-on-one relationships and having impactful interactions. It's pure introvert excellence when channeled properly. So how do you take advantage of all these different attributes and traits? What do you practically do with this information? There are a couple of things I think are absolutely critical. The first is planning. When I work with people who aren't doing well in their careers, they consistently fail to plan. If you look at people who are successful in demanding fields like medicine or finance or law, there's one attribute that many of them share, and that's planning. Someone decides they want to pursue medicine at age 15. They do extensive volunteer work. They go to college, choose the right major, they get into a good school because they worked hard in high school and planned ahead. Then they go to medical school, and again, they plan and think about what the next step is. Often when I'm working with people who feel stuck in dead-end jobs, it's because they're not thinking about what comes next. They feel trapped where they are, but they're not asking themselves, what are my options? What could come next? Even a dead-end job represents work experience that's valuable for another job. This current job might have no upward mobility. Other positions elsewhere might. If you work for 2 years in your current role and become an assistant manager, even if you can't rise above that in your current company, maybe you can become a full manager somewhere else. Maybe you can leverage that experience to become an assistant manager at a better organization. Practically, what I do with people is ask them, whatever your situation is right now, what does one step forward look like? If that step doesn't work out, what's your backup plan? What's your third option? I did this exercise with someone publicly once, and it's one I love. Take your dream job and reverse engineer it. I was talking to someone who said they wanted to be a developer at a specific gaming company. Looked up the actual job description for a developer there. That job description became a roadmap. It's not an obstacle, it's a checklist. You need to do this, learn this, accomplish this, gain experience in this, build this skill. That becomes your concrete to-do list for the next 5 to 7 years. It's absolutely achievable. Now, if you do all those things, definitely end up at that specific company. Who knows, right? Some of that is luck. Some is external circumstances. Some is timing. You'll have built genuine skills and experience that will serve you regardless. The most important question you can keep asking yourself is, comes next? What's the next step? What's the next opportunity? What's the next skill to build? The second critical thing, you're probably going to resist this one, is developing critical thinking skills. Most people don't actually know how to think critically. Most of us never get properly trained in it. We think critically, but we really don't. Researcher who won major recognition for basically showing that most human beings don't naturally engage in true critical thinking. This isn't meant as an insult. I don't think critically much of the time either. Let me tell you what critical thinking actually is. In medical school, they teach genuine critical thinking because if doctors don't learn it, patients suffer real consequences. The mind usually works is when you see a situation, your mind automatically generates an answer. It just floats up a response, and you believe that answer was thought through carefully and critically. But that's usually not what actually happened. In medicine, trained in something called differential diagnosis, it's conceptually simple but hard to execute well. When you see a patient, all of your medical training is going to tell you this patient has this specific problem. A kid comes in, it looks like the flu is going around, seems like they have the flu. The flu test comes back negative. Those tests are only accurate about 70% of the time anyway. So maybe they're one of the people with a false negative. They must have the flu. That's when patients can run into serious trouble. We have to force ourselves to do differential diagnosis. It could be the flu, could be a different virus, could be a bacterial infection, could be an underlying cancer presenting with these symptoms, could be an autoimmune disease, could be an environmental allergy, could be many different things. We train ourselves to systematically consider all the possibilities we didn't initially think about. That's what true critical thinking is. There's one difficult but incredibly useful exercise for critical thinking as it relates to career. Write a full page about your career situation. Explain why you are where you are. What factors have led you to this point in your career? Where are you right now, and how did you get here? Be thorough and honest. Then, and this is the hard part, be genuinely critical of what you wrote. What being critical means is that whatever you think, you need to learn how to think the complete opposite. You need to be able to construct the strongest possible argument against whatever you currently believe. Most people genuinely aren't capable of this. For example, someone might write, "I don't have a job because the economy is terrible." Okay? It's true that you don't have a job. It's true that the economy is struggling. It's true that there are systemic economic problems affecting opportunities. Fine, all of that can be true. And simultaneously, many people still have jobs. That's what it means to be truly critical of your own thinking. This is what we try to do in coaching and therapy. People come in and they think about their lives in a particular way. They have lots of compelling data and experiences supporting their beliefs. That's not what critical thinking is about. Critical thinking means thinking in a way that genuinely challenges what you believe and examines all the reasons you believe it. It's extremely difficult to genuinely pick apart your own beliefs, to question your own narratives about why things are the way they are. But this is essential work. When you can look at your career situation from multiple angles, when you can challenge your own assumptions about what's holding you back or what's possible, that's when real change becomes possible. You start seeing options you didn't see before. You start recognizing patterns in your choices that you can change. You begin to understand which of your beliefs are serving you and which ones are keeping you stuck. The truth is, your personality traits, whatever they are, aren't a life sentence. They're not a guarantee of success or failure. They're tools, and like any tools, they can be used well or poorly. The person who feels weak compared to their grinding father isn't doomed. The introvert isn't at a disadvantage compared to the extrovert. The neurotic person isn't destined to be miserable. Each of these traits, each of these characteristics can be leveraged in ways that support your success if you understand them and work with them rather than against them. The world is hard right now. Opportunities feel scarcer. Competition feels fiercer. The rules seem to keep changing. But that's exactly why understanding yourself matters more than ever before. When you can't control the external circumstances, When you can't control the economy or the job market, or whether automation affects your industry, the thing you absolutely can control is how you show up, how you use your particular strengths, how you plan and think and adapt. That internal work, that self-understanding becomes your competitive advantage in a difficult world. It's what allows you to navigate challenges others can't, to find opportunities others miss, build a career that actually works for who you are rather than constantly fighting against your own nature.